Good evening. My name is Andre Willis Johnson, and I'm the managing attorney of the legal clinics at GW Law and a very proud clinic alum. I have the honor and privilege of working in partnership with our incredible clinic dean, Lori Cohn. And on behalf of the clinical program, we are delighted to have so many of you joining for today's session of our Social Impact Showcase series. We began this multi-session social impact showcase in April to celebrate the 50th anniversary of our legal clinics and really just gather with our alums, faculty, clients, and community partners. We are also celebrating the critical role clinics have in helping law students develop vital skills and values while also providing direct legal services to clients who may not otherwise have access to justice or economic opportunity. So if you're joining us for the first session of our Social Impact Showcase series, this is an ongoing series. We've actually had, this is our fourth in the series. And just to provide a bit of context of our clinics, there is so much to celebrate in this season. We are really in a season, just to put it simply, of unprecedented growth. We owe a debt of thanks to our outstanding law school dean, Dana Matthew, and our partners in the Development and Alumni Relations Office. And together we've raised over $3 million, which is a huge step forward in helping us meet our goals of giving all students an opportunity to participate in clinics if they wish to do so. And last year, we actually provided over 72,000 hours of pro bono legal services. And very importantly, we've expanded our legal clinics to 16 clinics covering different practice areas. And 5 of those clinics have been established just in the past 2 years. And while we will not be able to feature each of our clinics in one of these showcase sessions, we do encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our clinic newsletters, which are released several times a year. And just a little bit of background on the showcase. In previous sessions, we've heard perspectives from our alums, faculty, and clients about several of our practice areas, including workers' rights, domestic violence, family law, and immigration law. And during this session, 3 incredible women will be sharing their stories, how they intersect with the clinic, and the impact overall that the clinic has had in their journey. So first joining us, we have Julie Kim, who is currently an associate at Knob Martens. Next, we have Angela Berry, one of our fabulous former clients. And last but certainly not least, we have Professor Renee Gentry, the director of our Vaccine Injury Litigation Clinic. You all are in for a treat this evening. And with that, Professor Gentry, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. So my name is Renee Gentry, as Andrea said. I've been a vaccine litigation practitioner for over 20 years. I'm one of the founders of the Vaccine Injured Petitioners Bar Association, which is a national bar advocating for vaccine injured individuals. I served as president of that bar for 4 years and now serve as a senior advisor to the board. I'm currently serving the Board of Governors for the U.S. Court of Federal Claims Bar Association, and I've previously been co-director of the Vaccine Injury Litigation Clinic and currently serve as director. Been director since January 2020. I think next year will be my 10th year teaching at GW Law School, so it's very exciting. And I'm an adjunct, so in addition to being director of the clinic, I also run my own vaccine injury law firm here in DC. So a little bit about the Vaccine Injury Litigation Clinic. It is one of the oldest clinics. It was founded in 1994. It was the first of its kind in the country and remains the only one of its kind in that the student attorneys in our clinic actually get certified as practicing attorneys in the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, and they represent injured children and adults for vaccine-related injuries and deaths. They appear in trial, which you'll hear about later from Julie. Mediation, appellate proceedings before the U.S. Court of Federal Claims and the Office of Special Masters. And a few years back, one of the clinics wrote an amicus brief in support of arguments at the Supreme Court. The clinic currently serves around 20 clients. And we'll hear Angela's perspective on being a client in a minute. But I also just say, I believe very strongly in this practice area because vaccines are critically important. And in order to have a successful universal immunization policy, you have to have a vibrant safety net. And that is the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, And that's what our clinic students practice in. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Renee. And I'd love to turn it over to you, Julie and Angela. Maybe we'll start with you, Julie, just to give a brief introduction of you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Julie, and I am a GW graduate. I just graduated in May of 2022. I was a student attorney for the vaccine clinic last year. So it was my 3L year from 2021 to 2022.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. And you, Angela?
I'm Angela, and I am a prior clinic client. I live in Florida, go Gators. And I was born and raised in the Panhandle, and right now I live in beautiful St. Augustine, Florida. And as I shared with them, I hate to tell you guys, but we had a really chilly day of 60 degrees down here. So we're kind of enjoying Florida. But I have 3 adult daughters and a rescue mutt. And I was a teacher for about 20 years. And I'm married to a teacher who teaches high school government. I had degrees in accounting and education. I've worked in both fields as an accountant, an auditor, then an English teacher. And I'm currently a bookkeeper working remotely. And I'm really pleased that, I could participate in this because I thought it was a very valuable experience for the clinic.
Oh, thank you. We're so glad to hear that. Well, with that, I know we had a number of, just a privilege to have you all here. So Professor Renee, would you like to jump in with some questions?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue, Angela, into why don't you describe your experience, what it was like prior to finding the clinic, and then finding us and the beginning of that process in connection with your vaccine injuries.
Well, in a word, prior to finding you guys, I would say it was exhausting and it was very frustrating. I sustained a STIRVA vaccine injury in February 2015. Short synopsis, basically went into a local pharmacy chain clinic for a quote unquote simple tetanus vaccine. And I walked out of that clinic to my car in extreme pain and unable to move or lift my arm at all. And from there, I spent about a year having physical therapy and steroid injections, MRI, and eventually surgery in March 2016. And so prior to finding the clinic, as I began to try to figure out what was wrong and what to do about it, not a single medical professional that I saw was even familiar with that type of injury. And I would say they were all very reluctant to even attribute it to the vaccine. There were times I was made to feel like a hypochondriac, and I felt very patronized because I knew there was no doubt in my mind. I knew I walked in fine, and that from that injection on, I was not fine. So I began to reach out to multiple attorneys, and I went back and looked at my notes today. I contacted attorneys in Virginia, Boston, Wyoming, and South Florida. And I actually had an attorney take my case for the vaccine injury in January 2016. And then after 5 months of reviewing my medical records, simply with no conversation, I got a letter in the mail dismissing me, saying, "You don't have a case." So at that point, I really began to consider giving up and felt like I just didn't have any access to legal services and no resources for financial help. And so at that point, this was prior to finding the clinic. At that point, it was just a very exhaustive search trying to get help medically and legally.
And then you contacted us.
Yes.
Don't you describe that experience?
Well, I finally came across the GW clinic just in a random internet search, trying to learn more about my injury and sort of self-advocate. And so when I reached out to Professor Gentry, who absolutely felt I had a case, I literally will never forget my conversation with her or where I was. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot. And just as I began to tell her, she said, "Tell me what happened." As I began to tell her, and she assured me, yes, I had a case. Yes, the clinic could help. I literally began to just sob and cry. And I told her I felt hope. I tell you what, I really, if I had to articulate it, I felt like I felt hope, I felt heard, and I felt believed for the first time in almost 2 years. So finding the clinic was really just a light at the end of the tunnel for me. And it was the beginning of a very long thing, but at that point I had regained hope. So finding the clinic was absolutely the best part of this.
That's great. I remember you being in your car. You said you were in your car pulled over. So give a description, if you tell everyone sort of what it's like working with the clinic and that's, and I know you said it's a long process. We're a federal program and obviously nothing with the federal government moves fast, but
right.
Describe that experience in working with the student attorneys.
Well, I mean, obviously I have the utmost respect for you, Professor Gentry, and I would say that the student attorneys to me were nothing short of impressive. And as a educator, I really appreciated the education aspect. I found it very intriguing that the students were getting this very real experience because they were doing a lot of stuff. And I mean, they were very professional. They were very thorough. They were very responsive, very compassionate. And I told each one that I worked with from, Eric on, I said, you guys keep all this because you're going to be very good attorneys. They had developed a lot of skills, and I could appreciate that they were getting to do all of these things under, Professor Gentry's supervision. And I just, there was nothing that anybody could do in terms of the clinic for my physical injury, but just knowing that they were on top of, helping me get some compensation really alleviated a lot of stress and anxiety when you have to worry, how do I pay all these medical bills? What do I do when there's no more money to pay for physical therapy or future surgeries? And so I was able to focus, being able to work with the clinic allowed me just to focus on, my health instead of those other considerations.
Absolutely. And a question that was not on our previously discussed list, but I trust you can answer it, is one of the things is most of our clinics, actually, people are local. They represent people local in the Washington, D.C. area. Our clinic represents people all over the country. And so we do a lot of things virtually. We were sort of pandemic safe ahead of the pandemic.
That's right.
How did that experience work in working with communication and email and telephone, et cetera?
And that's why I said, they were very responsive because I was always able to get in touch. I mean, if I had, and trust me, teachers are the ones who always have the most questions. We like to question things. I had a lot of questions. And I would, email or what have you. And I just felt like I could not have paid for better representation than what I received. And I, would get quick responses, knowledgeable responses. And I never felt as though me not being there physically in person ever hindered the representation that I received. And I was and as you said, well ahead of the pandemic, to have that opportunity to do that. And so, yes. And I think that was one of my questions was, can you guys represent me? I'm in Florida. So I don't think a lot of people, that's something they might not realize. And I would encourage anybody from wherever.
Absolutely great. What were some things that surprised you about the vaccine injury legal process?
Well, to start with, I didn't even know, and nobody I tell the story to has ever heard of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund. So I got an education, but I didn't know that existed. I wasn't even aware that there was the table of vaccine injuries. I certainly never heard the term CERVA, and quickly learned that I was pretty textbook for what that type of injury is. One really surprising thing to me was that the whole process of having a special master who's assigned, and that there were so few of them, in my opinion, to hear all of these cases nationally, vaccine injury cases. And so I'm still shocked that there's so few special masters. And as I alluded to earlier, one other thing that surprised me, if I'm being perfectly honest, was just the caliber of legal expertise I received. There might be some people who think, well, they're students, or how much do they know? And I'm telling you, they were on the ball. And I couldn't, as I said, I felt, the expertise and the treatment that I got was just top notch.
That's great. I just wanted to, just for people watching, a CERVA is a shoulder injury related to vaccine administration. We always joke that that's clearly a very medical term. Obviously, no, that's a legal term that they came up, but it's a combination of a mechanical injury and an immune injury in the shoulder. And in our courts, which is operated out of the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, we have 8 special masters, which act as sort of like judges in the process. And they have currently almost 4,000 cases in front of them. So it's even worse than when Angela was a client. And one of the things that the clinic has done, just to do a shout out to my students at the best, is that we've in the past years gone down on Capitol Hill and advocated for more special masters and have legislation pending on that now. So Angela, what advice would you give others going through this process?
Well, first of all, I would encourage anybody who even thinks they have such an injury to reach out to you guys, to this clinic. And as you said, no matter what part of the country they live in, because you guys can service, anybody, I guess, in the U.S. And from a practical standpoint, I would just advise them to keep notes and a timeline and begin to, organize all of their medical records and medical treatment along the way, which I tried to do because there's just so much that has to be produced, and I was kind of glad that I spoke to them early enough in the process that I was able to do that, so that we had everything and it wasn't overwhelming if you just continue to do that along the way. And I would just say there's hope and there's help. So.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Go switch to Julie now. And Julie, generally speaking, we split the clinic now these days into 2 teams. Because I'm an adjunct, I'm limited to 8 students, which is perfect because you can't really, that's a lot to have more than that. But so 2 teams of 4. And normally each team gets assigned multiple cases and students get assigned as the point person on individual cases. But you had a fairly unique experience during your clinic time. Why don't you share that?
Sure. So initially I was assigned to 3 different cases. And then I think like some people had 3 to 4 cases, but I was assigned to 3. And then I had a unique experience compared to other students because one of the cases went to a trial and during my last second semester of my 3L year. But in order to talk about the unique experience of this clinic, I had to start from, how the clinic students are on the front line to directly communicate with the clients. So like someone like Angela, I would contact Angela and then introduce myself and then receive and collect a comprehensive a history related to, the vaccine injury. But also it was an opportunity for me to contact the clients, like healthcare providers. Actually, one of the cases, the healthcare providers actually found about our clinic and then refer the client to us. So it was really helpful to communicate with him directly and then kind of fill the gaps as I was reviewing the medical history and the records and talking to the client and the family members and whatnot. And yeah, so that was such a unique experience as a student attorney who's experiencing as a law student. But also, I guess for me particularly, I had an opportunity to prep for a 3-day trial with Professor Gentry and along with my other students. So first thing I realized was I do not have control over my schedule. So the trial, it was ongoing for years before I got on. And we
tell a little bit about how when you first got assigned the case in August, what phase was the case in?
So it was during the it was just a waiting period to get the
appeal.
The appeal process. Yeah. Right. So and then it was, I think, during the winter, right before the winter break. That's when we got the notice of the Court of Federal Claim. The judge rendered a decision, and it was remanded. So we had to, and then the special master, send a court order saying that, there will be a 3-day trial, and we had to get like a prep for the trial. And yeah,
in a very limited period of time.
Yes.
Yeah, we had 3 weeks to prepare for trial.
We had a 3-week to prep for a 3-day trial. So that was very abrupt, but we made it work because, again, like, the unique thing about this clinic is we worked as a team. So when I could, like, for example, like prepping for a trial is one thing, and then after the trial, we had to write a post-hearing brief in a really limited time. So I'll talk more about it like later on, but yeah, so during the 3-day trial, I had a unique experience to, direct and cross-examine the expert witnesses. And you also run into like unexpected situations where Professor Gentry could not object on behalf of the student attorney. So I had to object, when the DOJ attorney, like against the DOJ attorney. And yeah, so it was conducted over Zoom, but it was such a great, real learning skills experience for me to learn. And yeah, and then afterwards we had to draft a post-hearing brief the following week. And personally, actually, I had a scheduled MPRE exam that week. So that's when one of my colleagues, like another student attorneys who stepped in, Amanda, and she volunteered to help me out. So she, yeah, that was such a great kind of teamwork effort that we made, and we filed a post-hearing brief within time.
Yes. 7 days, a 60-page post-hearing brief within 7 days, yes. And just to point out, the trial took place over spring break for the students. And I think Julie had said that every single student still showed up on the Zoom except for one who had to work during the time and couldn't do it. But all of the students showed up and gave great support, and it was all virtual. It was all done via Zoom. And Julie was doing direct exam of our expert, who is an expert pediatric neurologist, as well as she did the cross-examination of a gentleman, Dr. Fujinami, who was like one of the leading immunologists in the country. And she was amazing in doing cross-examination of him alone in her apartment, I will point out, because we were all individually in different places during the Zoom thing. And then because it was a remand period in 90 days, we actually got a result. And what was the result? What was the decision from the special master?
Oh yeah, so we won the case.
Like, you're burying the lead. Yes. We won the case. We won the case. This was one of the oldest cases on the docket. It had been around since 2009, and it involved, unfortunately, the death of a child. And I will tell you, and I say this to Julie frequently, a reminder of this, that the special master she practiced in front of has been on the court since 2006. And I think in outright cases like this, where there was a decision issued when it was challenged, he has only ruled for petitioners in about 6 cases. And Julie has one of those wins. So that's huge. And then again, that's since 2006. So that was an outstanding experience. So what advice would you give to other law students wanting to work in a clinic or on vaccine cases?
Yeah, so I would say I would highly recommend to join this clinic, because it was a very unique experience for me, not only learning the substantive law, learning about the national, the Vaccine Injury Act, but also such a unique, the procedure that you learn through the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. So both substantively and procedurally, you get to immerse yourself in this process. So I would say that was very unique for this particular clinic. And again, the teamwork, the way it's like a system of our team is just we're kind of there to help each other. Professor Gentry also broke us into like an even smaller team. So we got to have a weekly meeting, and then that's when we talked about not just about the client's cases, but also if we have difficult times, then that's a good time to discuss if somebody can help one another. So we had such a great teamwork.
It's great. I think it's usually one of the first times that a lot of students have a collaborative experience in law school, as opposed to, strictly the competitive side of law school. And that's always a bit of a unique thing. I like to run the clinic as a law firm, and you're all associates, so everybody's got to help everybody else out on all the cases. How has the Vaccine Injury Litigation Clinic helped shape your professional identity, interest, and work after graduation?
So I definitely learned to advocate for my client. And, before coming to law school, I had a different profession, and I was actually a nurse practitioner. And that's when I also learned to care for the client, but also through this clinic, I learned about like what it means to care and advocate for the client through the legal work. So I think that was such a great experience for me to, prepare for me to graduate and go into the real world. I definitely developed the listening and the writing skills through this clinic. You're the one who is drafting all the motions and all the briefs, and you are on the front line again, when you communicate with the clients and also with your supervisor, who's Professor Gentry. So that really helped me to prepare to go to this. Currently, I'm at a private law firm, but it has helped me to translate that skills to my current job.
Anything else you want to relate about your clinic experience?
Yeah, I mean, lastly, I guess just the value of teamwork. I think teamwork with your colleague and your supervisor, it's a big part of, in this legal industry, I realized. And just learning that, for me, it was a 3L year, but I think if you're 2L, I would recommend you even applying and starting that early, or even if you're 3L, it's never late to join the clinic and learn that real lawyering skills.
Right. Thank you, Julie.
I love that. Thank you both for sharing those beautiful stories. Renee, I do have some questions for you. I'd love to hear just your experience in working with Julie as a law student. I know you see a number of law students, but I know I've heard such a standout student Julie's been, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
I mean, one of the things I love about teaching is you get to push the, law students into the position where they're finally having to actually give you legal opinions. And usually when they start out, they're very nervous about that, and they don't. I'm like, this is what people are going to pay you for, so get more comfortable in it. And what I loved about working with Julie was that, first of all, she's very smart, great writer, all of that stuff, like the basic things that you want. She did and definitely cared for the clients a lot and was very intuitive in that. But she also really wanted to learn, new things, wanted to prove what's the best way to do this. I think, as a 20-year plus practitioner, had I been thrown in without my student attorneys, without Julie into that trial on a remand period, I probably would have had to have been sedated. But she was, I mean, that's a super compressed time period. To give you an example, we normally have months to prepare for a trial. The trial's been set 2 years out, and we know what we're going to be arguing and for months and months and months. And in 3 weeks to prepare witnesses. We had a lot of crazy things that happened with an extremely challenging special master. And then oral arguments after the fact, all over break and MPRE. I think when she said about you learn that your schedule is not your own as a lawyer, I think that's absolutely right. But the fact that she stepped in and even being nervous, just excelled and wanted to do it so badly. And she was so great. And, I always laugh at the questions of how does it, does it make you want to do vaccine cases afterwards? And I think almost always it's no. It's a very unique practice area, but we try to get the litigation skills to transfer over, and just the critical thinking that she used, the compassion for the client, as well as she can be very quiet, but she's got a fierce competitive streak too, where she's like, no, we're gonna go after this guy and we're gonna get this case. And it was great to see. So I thought it was outstanding to work. I'm very fortunate in the students that I get in my clinic that are all, I always say it makes me a better lawyer. It makes me a better practicing lawyer teaching, because they see things that, we've looked at for so long and are like, oh, that's this. And they're like, no, there's a lot more in that. They remind you of all the different things in it. And I think Julie was an outstanding example of that. And she's going to be she is an amazing lawyer. So I always tell her, I'm like, you won in front of Moran. I'm like, that's just like, again, six people in the history. So it's pretty impressive.
That's incredible. Thank you for that. I also love to hear, this is a bit of a two-pronged question, but just describing your experience in working with Julie, and you've done a bit of that, but also with Angela, just in terms of case supervision and that process.
That's something I think I'm better at now than when I first started teaching at the clinic, because it's hard to let go of control of things. And when you're supervising students and clients, there's always a bit of a nervous thing of what's the student going to say to somebody when I'm not right there with them. And I think, in this instance, and overall, it's positive. It's just my own, control issues. And I always tell the students, I'm like, I need you to embrace your professor's touch of OCD, because, like this is all very important. I think working with her was great. Angela, I can say without hesitation, is a dream client. Anyone would love to have her as a client. The organization, like she was talking about, and being a teacher and understanding, the documentation that you need as a lawyer sometimes is a lot, and it can be overwhelming to a lot of people, whether a client is sophisticated or not, as we would say. But Angela was great. She was very responsive. She was very understanding. It meant I didn't have to, check in. We have some clients that are like, yeah, we'll work with the students, but we want to work with them, but have you be on every phone call as well. And I didn't have that experience with Angela, and it was fantastic. And again, Julie was, also very easy. There was a lot of simple, we have the class every week. We do an hour team meeting every week. And then I'm available to the students throughout the week, and email and text. I think they're sometimes surprised when I respond to an email at 1:30 in the morning, but I know that's when law students work. So if I'm up, I respond. But no, that was both a fantastic experience.
That's awesome. Another question for you is, any advice for folks going through the vaccine injury process from your perspective?
Absolutely. One thing that Angela said in particular, but keep records of everything. I always tell people to keep a pain log, keep a diary of what's going on from the moment it happens. And call someone, if not the clinic, call someone, some lawyer as quickly as possible. It's a 3-year statute of limitations. It's very short. It's amazing how fast that goes. And also that you don't need a treating doctor support. As Angela said, none of her doctors believe her, I think that's what makes our clients, on par with the other clients in the other clinics, is our clients are very, very vulnerable. We've had clients that have been kicked out of doctor's offices because they won't get vaccinated again. Even though they've had severe injuries. We've had a lot of where your family doesn't believe you. Vaccines, unfortunately, get very politicized. And so our clients are very vulnerable in that regard, but they need to contact an attorney. The Vaccine Injury Petitioners Bar is another good resource, vipbar.org. This is a highly specialized area of law. You may start with your local PI attorney or med mal attorney, but make sure they know what they're doing, because it's so easy to make a lot of mistakes in this. Our bar association hosts a boot camp every year for new practitioners. It's a free, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. CLE all day, how to do a vaccine case. I tell the students they get to go, and I'm like, it's our clinic in a day. Basically, it's like how you do everything, because it's so important to us that people get represented appropriately in these cases. But those would be the main things that I would say.
That's really helpful, and timely and relevant, just with all going on in the world. How about advice for students who are applying to your clinic, the Vaccine Injury Litigation Clinic?
One, I would say, don't be afraid if you don't have a science background. I know Julie was a nurse practitioner. I always start the first day of telling students the only science class I had was political science in my undergrad. So I had no science, medical background, anything like that. You don't need that. We actually teach you the science that you need to know. We have a colleague that comes in who is a vaccine practitioner, who is also a PhD in biopharmacology. And she does a presentation on presenting scientific evidence in the court. And, it is challenging because they're dealing with new language, and it's not just like a typical civil litigation. We have special rules in the vaccine court and procedures and things like that. And the science is usually new for people, although I have a lot of IP students and everything coming in, but I think, you know, don't be dissuaded by that. Don't be intimidated by that. We'll make sure that you have the science that you need. We'll make sure that you can have a conversation with an expert if necessary, and have a conversation with a client. You know, I want you to succeed in this clinic, and I'm going to make sure you have everything in there. So that's the one thing. I have a lot of people that have a fear of, I don't have a biology background, or I don't have this background. And I'm like, neither do I. You're fine. So, and I teach it, so you're fine.
That's great. Oh, it looks like we have our first question in the chat. Thank you, Gia. The question is for all the panelists, I believe. It says, about how many clients has the Vaccine Injury Litigation Clinic helped since its founding? So I guess that might be for you.
Wow. Hi, Gia. First of all, good to see you. Gia's a former student.
Oh, great.
And that's some cases, yeah, Charles. That's a good question. Wow. We currently have about 20 clients in right now, but I mean, we've usually, it's a little bit low right now just because we had so many cases go to trial. Last year we had the clinic students, every student in the class had a trial, at least one, which almost never happens because our cases are so delayed. I mean, but we average, you know, around 30 cases normally. So 30 cases a year. They don't all finish in a year, but I mean, hundreds and hundreds of cases. The clinic has brought in, you know, I think the website says something like, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars since 1994 to clients overall. So hundreds of clients to be sure. And right now we currently have 20 clients, I think about 20 clients active.
Okay, that's excellent. And kind of a short segue, but I do see former Professor Peter Myers in the room too. Thank you for joining.
Hi, Peter. Peter may know better. Yeah. Never how many clients. Yeah.
He founded our clinic, and so thank you so much for joining us. I do have one question for you, while others might be thinking of questions. Renee, you mentioned the legislation pending on the push for more special masters, which definitely seems important. Right. Is there any other legislation that we can be watching out for, thinking about supporting if we're, you know, interested in wanting to help make this space more seamless for folks who are injured from vaccines?
Absolutely. Well, I think there's two things. One, we know that for this term of Congress, which is about to end, we really only have the special masters legislation, which I think will still be a critically important legislation to increase the number of special masters. The part that kind of fell off this year that we didn't get out of committee was about doing some things, modernizing the vaccine injury compensation program. It has not changed since the late 1980s, where there's still a cap on pain and suffering of $250,000. That's like a 1989 number. That needs to come up. The death benefit is still only $250,000. So that wants to come up. We need that to come up. If you're injured by a covered vaccine, and those are all the childhood vaccines, basically, then you have to go through this program first. You can't sue a pharmaceutical company. So it's absolutely important that this program, you know, is improved and stays successful. The second thing, which is is not related to this program, it needs to be, is the COVID vaccine. The COVID vaccine is not currently covered in our program. And what's worse, it's covered in the countermeasures program, which is a black hole. It's basically the right to file and lose. That, you know, they still don't, you know, 2 years in now, they still don't have a table of injuries associated with it. And what we're hearing now is they're trying to block so that everyone that's already received a COVID vaccine, if they were injured, they are not going to come into our program. They're trying to prevent that from happening. And we're trying to get a push through Congress to say those people need to be treated. You know, they went out and did the right thing. They did their duty as citizens, and they should be treated fairly. And that means getting them into our program and getting that covered in our program. And that's something that the students have worked on as well. We did take on last year 2 COVID clients to show the students sort of the difference. There's no attorneys really in the countermeasures program, but to help them advocate on what that's like as well. And I think that's important for them to learn that, you know, sometimes as lawyers, our job doesn't just stop at the courtroom. We have to work to advocate to make the law better. And the clinics have always been, the clinic students have always been very active in that. So I think those are the two key things. And again, just pushing it to get the special masters legislation through this year. We've got one more bill. I think the last big spending bill we're trying to get it on there. So
good. Okay.
Thanks for asking about that.
Yeah, of course.
Write your Congress people, tell them COVID vaccine injured people should be treated fairly. Go into our program.
Yeah, actually very timely, kind of in your remarks. It looks like Peter Myers he did ask if you would talk briefly about the difference between the NVICP and the COVID compensation program.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yes.
It looks like there might be, let me just check the chat
Thank
here.
you, Angela, for the shout out in our
Oh,
chat.
oh, that's great. Thank you for that. Angela, I have one question for you as well. Just going through this process, I'm curious how this has maybe impacted the way you work with other medical providers in the future, if it's kind of changed that, help improve that, or just any takeaways that you got from the clinic there.
I like to tell them how to give me my shots now. It was very nerve-wracking because for a very long time, I did not want to get an injection. And I mean, I would hyperventilate. I mean, it was one of those things I could not get past. And then I, had, a couple instances where I really needed to get a vaccine. In fact, the vaccine I had gone in for, the tetanus, the added insult upon injury, the very thing I went in for, because I had an animal encounter, that tetanus shot, I was told, because it did not get injected properly, did nothing for me. So ultimately I had, another, like a year later, another incident with a cut or something where the physician was like, you need to get this, you really need that because the other tetanus didn't count. And I really, yes, I had a very hard time. And sometimes I'll take a little printout because the CDC has one on how to administer vaccines. And I have no qualms with saying, I need us both to be seated or I need us both to be standing. And can you show me where you're going to give it before you give it? Because I learned a lot through this process and I learned what went wrong. And what went wrong for me was pretty much every single thing, that you're not supposed to do was done. So it definitely changed, I was reluctant, but I did end up getting COVID vaccines and other things. But I just have a long conversation now. And I figure if a medical professional is not willing to have that conversation, especially if they're not aware of that, then I can go somewhere, I will keep going somewhere else. So it was a very enlightening process for me. So I learned a lot.
That's good.
Thank you so much.
I'll add another tip to that. I would tell people in the COVID vaccine, then everybody was going out to get it, or even the flu shot, because you go in, that's in the winter and you go to a Target and you're wearing a sweater. And so what they do is they pull their collar down. Don't do that. Wear a t-shirt, wear something under it that they can get to your arm and not go from lift up on the t-shirt and not go down. It helps them put it in the right spot.
Well, and Renee, I go beyond that. Now I protect my shoulder. Right. I will not move you're not going to inject me up here. I'm going to protect my shoulder. And I still, back to your question, Andrea, this was the one that was injured. I've still never gotten one in that arm. I won't do that arm at all. And then I do, just like I said, there's just so many ways that it can go wrong. And like I said, what should have been a simple injection, and I'm learning there is no such thing as a simple injection. I don't care what the contents of the vaccine are there, it's, you can't, I'm very cautious about where I go as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I know for me, I didn't know that the CDC had posted the requirements on kind of the best ways to do it. So I know that's going to be helpful for a number of us here. Thank you.
Well, and you imagine when COVID came out and everybody, like all the people they were drafting in to do the vaccinations administration, I'm like, those people weren't trained. I was just having panic attacks every day. Yes. Like, oh, please do this the right way. They're going to do that. But I would like to point one thing out too, because I think Angela is a perfect example of this. We often get questions, sort of very side-eye questions about is this an anti-vax? The anti-vaxxer thing, and quite obviously not. I'm like, my first response to that is always, all of my clients got vaccinated. So they're not anti-vax. Now they might not want to get another one if they've had a severe injury and it might be contraindicated for them. But no, we're certainly not that. And, and as I said at the beginning, we want a robust universal immunization policy, and you have to have that. I think when you see this sort of the vaccine hesitancy is when they come up against this irrational wall, and where nobody's like, no vaccines don't cause anything, they're magic. And that, I think, is where you start to get vaccine hesitancy and things like that. So as long as we can have these conversations, like Angela was saying, like a real conversation with your doctor, which is also known as informed consent on what you're doing, which is, you're right. So I think like that's one of the things, but generally, if your doctor's not willing to talk to you and you have the opportunity to get a different doctor, I would say certainly get a different doctor. But yeah, but the training for all those people administering vaccines was a little bit dodgy there for a while.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Question for you, Julie. I'm curious what led you. I'm always very curious about what leads students to particular clinics, because we have 16 now. So there's plenty of options, and it sounded like you might have had an interest in litigation, but I'd love to hear kind of what inspired you to apply to this one.
Yeah, sure. So actually, I learned about this clinic even before coming to GW Law. And I was talking to someone who I was introduced to, who was also a former nurse and then became an attorney. And then she didn't even go to GW Law, but she knew about the program. And she said it was such a unique experience, even though she didn't go to GW Law. She was part of the vaccine injury clinic at her law school. And she recommended that it was such a great experience, and how her background in healthcare did help to kind of go through the pages of medical records and pointing out what could be pertinent to the case. And you kind of learn about this different aspect of the whole big picture of healthcare. So yeah, so it was such a unique way of introduction. And then, yeah, when I came and met Professor Gentry, and, like she had mentioned that some students might be afraid that, oh, I don't have science background, I shouldn't do, but really, like, I think the good students from our clinic, I mean, I can attest to, like, Amanda, who helped me out with the brief. I mean, she has such a great, good writing skills. So I think if you love writing, I think you will learn a lot from this clinic, even though you may not have the science background. So.
That's great. Thank you so much. Oh, it looks like Angela has a question here. I can read it. So Angela would love to know how Professor Gentry got involved with and interested in vaccine injury. That's a fabulous question.
I completely by accident, although this is one of my favorite stories to tell to the students. I always tell it in the first class. I was doing immigration law, and I worked in an office in the Watergate, and I was doing immigration law on 9/11. And we were evacuated, and immigration shut down. And I was laid off at the end of that week. So it was kind of an ugly week. And I just sort of sat at home in shock, like everyone else, for about a month, and decided I have to do something. And I talked to, one thing I always tell my students, like, stay in touch with your friends from college and your friends from law school, because you never know who's going to help you. And it was a friend from college. And I said, I need, I'm looking for jobs. I need a job. And she said, oh, my husband's firm is looking for someone to help collect medical records right now. Why don't you do that, temporarily? You'll get paid for that while you're looking for a job. And by the end of the first week at that firm, they'd made me a lawyer, and I had a nameplate and everything. And so that was October 21st, 2001. So here I am 20 plus years, 21 years later at my temp job. So you never know what will transpire. And that's the other thing I tell students. I'm like, if you don't know what kind of law you want to practice, don't worry about it. If you absolutely know what kind of law you want to practice, don't worry about it if that goes away. You always have great skills as a lawyer. But yeah, that's how it was. And I think I would not have stayed had the Department of Justice attorneys that I went up against, had they not treated my clients so poorly. I think people being mean to sick kids and sick adults really just triggered every Atticus Finch DNA in me. And I just sort of became like this, very much like, no, I'm not going to allow that. That's not a thing that's going to happen. Even when I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, because I'd been there, I think, like 2 weeks at that point, but I was like, no, you can't do that. And I think, yeah, that's it. And then so I stayed, because like that really appealed to me, of that these were very vulnerable clients. And, a lot of times in those circumstances, the most vulnerable people get, they don't get the best attorneys. They don't have access to the best attorneys. And that's why I think Like the clinical program is amazing. The people that come into the clinics at GW get extraordinary representation because the students are amazing and the faculty that leads them are, just incredible, outstanding in their field. I'm always in awe of the faculty at the clinics. So yeah, that's how I kind of fell backwards into it. And I always tell them, like, don't worry about the science. It took me 2 years to figure out how to spell neurodemyelinating. And now I can say these sentences and it sounds almost like I know what I'm talking about, but very technical things. But yeah, you can have an intelligent conversation with the chair of the neurology department at Georgetown. You're doing okay. So
that's great. Well, we're coming close to the end here. I think we have time for maybe one more question if everybody can go around and answer, but maybe one last piece of advice that you would have for a student who's interested in helping clients in this space. And Renee, we can start with you.
Sure. Again, I think you don't need any particular background. We don't have any requirement courses for the clinic in this space. I think, so again, don't be intimidated by that. But even if you're not in a clinical setting, I think it's absolutely important. And one of the things that I love about this program, as well as what the clinics do generally, is to hopefully foster an interest in pro bono work, public interest work, and helping. I had a friend who was a partner at, he's a partner at Septo Johnson, came in once and talked to the students about that. And he said, he goes, I love my work, it's challenging, but I've never had more fun or been more passionate about something than the pro bono cases that I take on. And so I think there's always space for you to do social impact lawyering. There's always space for you to help people. You have to balance that with paying off your loans and, keep paying your rent and things when you're first starting off. But I think there's always space for that. And a clinic is a great way to get an introduction into that and see what that's like.
That's great. Thank you, Renee. How about you, Angela?
Sorry about that. I needed to unmute. Well, I am extremely thankful for the student attorneys that I had my experience with. And I just would encourage, I think it's just a fascinating opportunity. And, if you want to talk about making a difference, they may or may not remember me, but I remember them, and they made a huge impact on my life. And so, it gets me emotional because it just was so amazing. And I would encourage any student who is, interested in making a difference, and as, Professor Gentry said, whether this is their lifelong calling or not, I think there were just generally, as Julie said, so many transferable skills. That's what I felt like with all of them. I'm like, whatever you end up doing or practicing, you're going to be an amazing attorney, because there was just so many things I could see in them. But I think it's a great experience. I know it changed my life. And so I would encourage students to consider that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And how about you, Julie?
So I think aside from everything we've talked about, I think another unique thing about this clinic is it's a year-long clinic. So I think had I not been in the vaccine clinic, I don't think I would have had that trial experience, because it happened during my second semester of my 3L year. So I definitely encourage this clinic, because not only learning about the substantive part of this unique aspect of the area of law, but also just being in a clinic for a year long, it taught me a lot how to continue that relationship with the client and your colleagues and your mentor, your professor. So I definitely want to encourage the students who are interested in learning real learning skills and kind of immerse yourself in this kind of trial experience and whatnot. Definitely highly recommend it.
And it's always great to do that phone call that you won. The rare moments in the vaccine world sometimes. So we got to cherish those moments and take a moment on gratitude for that.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, thank you all. Really, this conversation has been so rich. And since we only have a few minutes left, Renee, Julie, Angela, on behalf of all of our viewers, I just want to thank you all for sharing your stories. Your different experiences have been just so inspiring to hear, and we really appreciate you all taking the time to join us. And I do want to give a reminder to everybody that this is an ongoing series. So we do have another session. Our next session will be in February. And that will be featuring our criminal defense clinic. Their theme is advocating for dignity in indigent criminal defense. And we will have a client, alum, and our faculty supervisors over our criminal defense clinic there as well. So encourage you to share the word, certainly register if you're interested. But again, we really do appreciate all of you taking the time to join us.